Daniel Sports Central, we go over our 2022 college football predictions for the Oregon Ducks, team that went 10-4 overall in the 2021 season. Not a bad season for Oregon, but how will this team be in 2022? That's what we go over here today. We'll be analyzing this team and predicting their schedule game by game in this video, starting out with their team trends. Oregon 10-4 once again last season. Wasn't a bad year for Oregon. I mean, this team, they definitely were a bit of a younger team last season, so a 10-4 record certainly is not bad. And this team, I mean, if you look at their schedule and who they played, I mean, Oregon, this team had a chance to make it into the college football playoff, but there was one team that stood in the way of the Ducks getting to the college football playoff, and that was Utah. Utah beat Oregon twice, once in the regular season and in the Pac-12 championship game as well. And those games weren't close. I mean, Oregon got dominated twice by Utah, so that certainly was. I mean, Utah was this team's kryptonite last season. They were 6-1 in their first 7 games, then 4-3 in their last 7. Beat Ohio State 35-28. That, I mean, you could potentially consider that to be the signature win of the season. I mean, Ohio State, that was a good team last season, and Oregon went into Columbus in that game and got the win, which was huge. They went to UCLA, got the win there 34-31. Beat Washington 26-16. They beat Oregon State 38-29. They lost to Utah 10-38. Once again, that game was in the Pac-12 title. They lost them 10-38, and Utah, I mean, they excelled because of their 2 wins over Oregon, and they went on to lose in the Alamo Bowl against Oklahoma 32-47. That was a tough loss there in their bowl game. So kind of a bumpy season for Oregon. I mean, 10-4 is not a bad record. You got 10 wins, but I mean, it was a few of those close losses, and I mean, the losses in general that were, I mean, definitely frustrating for this team last season. But roster preview going into next year, this team does lose the starting quarterback, Anthony Brown. Last season, he put up just over 2,900 yards, 19 touchdowns, 7 picks, 64% completion rate. So his stats weren't terrible last season. I mean, he also rushed for over 650 yards and 9 touchdowns. So Anthony Brown was not bad last season. I mean, if you look at his stats overall, statistically, he was not bad. I mean, he may have been inconsistent at times, but Anthony Brown in general was a pretty good quarterback last season. They bring in former Auburn quarterback Bo Nix, which is huge. I mean, Bo Nix has got some good experience. He has been with Auburn for multiple seasons, from 2019 to 2021, and he's been the starting quarterback for all 3 seasons between 19 and 21. And overall, he's been very consistent. He really hasn't improved too dramatically, but I mean, going in from, I mean, he's an SEC quarterback, and I mean, the SEC is obviously a brutal conference, and moving to the Pac-12, which is, I mean, we can all agree is not quite as tough of a conference, could be a good thing for Bo Nix, not going up against as stout defenses as he has been. And I mean, Bo Nix, I'm pretty optimistic about him. I feel like he's going to do pretty well with Oregon. And if you look at the running back situation, Travis Dye, that's a tough loss, losing him. He transferred out to USC, so he will not be around next season. I mean, that's a crucial. You can't have Travis Dye transferring out. I mean, that's going to be a brutal loss. I mean, last season he put up 1,600 yards, 18 touchdowns. I mean, that's going to be tough to replace going into next season, especially considering, I mean, he's not moving on to the NFL quite yet. He's transferring to another Pac-12 school, and I mean, that's a tough loss there. I mean, if you've got Bo Nix as quarterback, you got Travis Dye in the backfield. I mean, this offense could be stellar. And you also lose your second running back, C.J. Verdell. So you're not only losing Travis Dye, but also your second running back in C.J. Verdell, who put up 480 yards and 7 touchdowns last season. But you do return Byron Cardwell, who last season put up 400 yards and 3 touchdowns. So you got him coming back, but you're losing your top 2. So that is a bit of a concern there. Receiving core, you lose Devin Williams, top receiver from last season, put up 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. You do return your second receiver, and Chris Hudson. Last season, he put up 400 yards, and then you do lose your third receiver in Johnny Johnson III. So you lose 2 of your top 3 receivers. You lose your top 2 in the backfield, but you do bring in Bo Nix, which if you ask me personally, I feel like Bo Nix is, I mean, Anthony Brown and Bo Nix are on a pretty even level, if you ask me. If you compare the two, Bo Nix, I feel like, has got a higher ceiling than Anthony Brown. I feel like Bo Nix could actually have a great season in 2022 here, but I mean, there are a couple of tough losses once again. Lose one on the O-line, lose one on the D-line, one linebacker, and one in the secondary. So defensively, looks pretty good going into next season, I will say. You do lose Thibodeau, obviously a very crucial loss there, but otherwise it looks pretty good for Oregon defensively. So brings the question, though, I mean, this offense, there's a few question marks for sure, but is this team a potential dark horse contender, national contender in 2022? I feel like this team is definitely one of the top three teams that I'm favoriting in the Pac-12. You got Oregon, Utah especially. I feel like Oregon and Utah are going to be the top two in the conference. USC could potentially be a team to keep an eye on. I mean, they got some huge changes, and I mean, yeah. So, I mean, Oregon, I feel like this is a team that's I'm pretty comfortable saying is going to be good. But once again, there are a few question marks offensively that if they don't get filled, if the depth just doesn't work out, I mean, that could be a definite concern going into next season. But transfer portal and recruiting going into next season, you got David, safety, who's in the transfer portal. Running back Marquise Irving's coming in from Minnesota, so that could be a good addition to the backfield there. Jordan Riley's coming in. Defensive lineman from Nebraska. Gonzalez, safety's coming in from Colorado. So you got a few players coming in, but you do lose Micah Pittman, receiver DJ James, defensive back Jason Jones, defensive lineman. You're losing all three of them, and then you do have Caleb Chapman coming in from Texas A&M, receivers. So you do have some key players coming in for sure. That's going to add some good depth. Recruiting-wise, it looks pretty good as well. 13th in the nation, first in the Pac-12. You got 1 5-star coming in, and then 8 4-stars. So overall, I mean, transfer portal and recruiting, I mean, you're losing a few key players to the transfer portal, but recruiting-wise, I'd say looks really good going into next season. So there's a lot to like here by the Ducks, but once again, as I mentioned before, there are a few question marks. But looking at your schedule now going into next season, you got Georgia, just a brutal game to start off the season in a neutral location there. So you face up against the defending national champions in week 1 against Georgia. And if Oregon wins that game against Georgia, yeah, that would be a massive win, to say the least, for the Ducks to start off the season. Can you imagine? But then you got Eastern Washington on the 10th. You got BYU on the 17th. BYU is going to be good. You got Washington State on the road on the 24th. Then you got Stanford at home to start off your October. You got Arizona on the road, UCLA at home, and then California on the road to end out your October. And then November, you got Colorado on the road. You got Washington at home, Utah at home, and then Oregon State on the road to finish out the regular season. So looking at September here, you got Georgia. I got to favor the Bulldogs there. I mean, that's just. I mean, I'm pretty comfortable picking Georgia. I feel like it's going to be one of those games where it's close for a long time, but I feel like in the fourth quarter, Georgia is going to pull away and win that game by maybe 10, 14 points or so. But certainly I feel like Oregon's got a chance, but when you got the amount of changes that this team does have, I mean, there are multiple changes offensively. Bo Nix, his first game, I mean, with Oregon, potentially that could be a good thing, but also I feel like Oregon is going to take a little bit to warm up this offense. I mean, there's multiple changes once again, multiple new players. Eastern Washington, I'm going to put that as an easy win there against an FCS opponent. BYU, I will favor Oregon there. That'd be a huge win. BYU is going to be good next season. I could get a close win there at home. Then you travel to Washington State. Washington State's a team that I feel like is going to be they'll be good next season. I could see them between 6 and 8 wins. And so you might say as an Oregon fan, oh, we're not going to lose that game to Washington State on the road. But, I mean, those road games, I mean, there are a lot of circumstances for most teams where you take a confusing loss or two. And I feel like that's going to be one of them there. Losing to Washington State on the road after a close win against BYU. I mean, it's a tough first 3 games. Playing Georgia and BYU in your first 3. BYU could be a contender next season. So, I mean, I'm going to put Washington State as a predicted loss, but I do think, I mean that game's going to be incredibly close, and it could go either way, but that's just what I'm predicting for now. October, you got Stanford, Arizona, both easy wins. UCLA at home. UCLA could be good as well, but I'll put that as a win favoring Oregon. Then Cal on the road, I'll favor Oregon there as well, in somewhat of a closer one because it's on the road. 6-2 is the record going into November, and I think you win out from there. You beat Colorado on the road, and they got Washington coming to town. That'll be a close win. I think Washington's going to be decent. I think maybe 6 to 8, maybe 9 wins at the max for the Huskies next season. Utah, that's going to be a huge game. I mean, if you look at, Utah, of course, that's the team that was the kryptonite for Oregon last season. I think the Ducks go into that game. It's a home game. They'll be ready to go. They'll get the win against Utah. beating them in a close one. But I will say, I feel like Washington State or Utah, I do think you'll lose one of those games. You're going to win one between Washington State and Utah, but you'll lose one as well. So you could take that into consideration as well. But Oregon State then on the road, it's a road game. I'll put it as a yellow game, but I do want to favor Oregon there for sure. So 10-2 is the record prediction for Oregon next season. I do think this team, very good chance they'll be competing for a Pac-12 title, and I wouldn't be surprised one bit if they won it. College football playoff hopes, I mean, losing to Georgia, I mean, if you can beat Georgia, I mean, and this team wins that, I mean, obviously you're in the college football playoff, but I mean, college football playoff hopes are slim with a 10-2 record out of the Pac-12, but that said, I mean, winning a Pac-12 title certainly would not be a bad thing either. But let me know your thoughts and comments below on the Ducks, and I appreciate you guys all watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.